Dr. Brett and Jessica Finlay, welcome to Bendiksen Airways.
Good
Thank
morning. How
you.
are you?
Good. Um, is it true that invisible microbes help shape our thoughts, health, and even aging?
Yes. But exactly how they do it, we're still figuring it out. But yes, I mean, there's a lot of compelling data that many body processes that previously we had no idea microbes might be involved or seriously involved in. And yeah, so we know they shape many aspects of our body. And so I think the answer is definitely yes. Jess, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a microbiologist by training, and in doing this book together, it's really opened my mind. I'm a geographer. I usually study the environments, built social natural environments, and I haven't really previously paid much attention to these invisible neighbors we have throughout our entire lives. And it was staggering how much they can shape all aspects of our lives. They completely surround us, encode us. They're everywhere. And so it really was quite staggering to me and changed my perspective and even how I live my daily life in doing the research and writing of this book.
Interesting. Before we move on, how would you introduce yourself?
I'm Brett Finlay. I'm a professor of microbiology and biochemistry at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, BC. I've been studying microbes all my life. I've spent much of my life studying microbes that cause disease, things like salmonella and pathogenic E. coli, and figuring out how they actually tweak our body and make us sick and cause diarrhea and things. And then probably 15, 20 years ago, we started to get into the microbiome. At that time, really nothing was knowing about it and started to study all these other organisms in the gut that don't seem to make us sick. And so I've been studying the microbiome for that amount of time.
My name is Jessica Finlay. I'm an assistant professor of geography at the Institute of Behavioral Science at the University of Colorado Boulder in the United States. I'm a health geographer and environmental gerontologist. So I'm interested in where people live as they age and how it affects their health and well-being. For me, aging is a lifelong process. We don't suddenly snap our fingers and become old. And those environments that we live in, be it our built environments, social environments, natural environments, have huge impacts on our health and well-being and the opportunities or hazards that we face. And in particular, I look at how those neighborhoods matter for our dementia risk. So do we live in places that can encourage us to be physically active, socially engaged, cognitively stimulated, and creative and complex activities? All of those are hugely protective for our brains and our bodies overall, and just general health, well-being, and vitality.
Should be an
Just to
interesting talk.
clarify everything, Jessica is my daughter. So we are
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
father-daughter.
yeah. We'll get back to that. Uh,
Okay.
could you briefly explain what the microbiome is and why it's so important for overall health?
Sure. So the microbiome is really a term that refers to all the invisible microbes living in and on us. So this includes bacteria, includes viruses, includes fungi, and many other single-celled organisms. Basically, everything you need to see under the microscope. And we know we're coated in these microbes. They live in many different places. And so most people think of the intestines where most of them live, but they're on our skin. They're in the armpits, and they're all over our mouth, for example. There's even a few in the lungs. So it's really a collective term referring to the microbes in and on us. We tend to, when we say the microbiome, we tend to think bacteria. That's because these have been the easiest to study, and we kind of ignore the viruses and the fungi and things because they're much harder to do. So yeah, basically they're all the bugs that, and generally what they do for us, I think that's too long to answer in one sentence. So we will get there. They're important in many different aspects of us.
Yeah, I came across your latest book, uh, The Microbiome Master Key, Harness Your Microbes to Unlock Whole Body Health and Lifelong Vitality. And am I right in saying that it's an updated book from earlier?
Yeah, so we wrote the first edition, probably 5+ years ago. And since then, the science has dramatically changed and advanced in exciting and new ways, giving us some of those explanations we're always seeking, the hows and the whys, or what are the links. We're just a little more confident and clear about them. We also all lived through a global pandemic that dramatically changed. And so, in some ways, our societal perspectives on embracing our microbes shut down, very understandably, given the spread of COVID-19 and across the world, but we've struggled since then, I think, in some ways to re-embrace our microbes in healthful and thoughtful ways. And so we felt it was important to address some of those perspectives and ideas, and then of course we just new discoveries about the brain, about sleep, about stress, you name it. It's just really an exploding and exciting field, and so it felt time to give this update. It's the book we wanted to write originally. The science just wasn't quite there yet, and now it is in really exciting and instructive ways that help us inform how to live our lives.
What's the reason science has exploded in this field the last few years?
Well, I mean, science exploded in this area probably about 15 years ago when we had the capacity to sequence the microbes, because most microbes living in and on us, you can't just put on a petri dish and grow them. So we kind of knew they were there. We could see them in a microscope. We didn't know what they were. And really, when they finished sequencing the human genome in the mid 2000s, there's all these sequencers that sort of look at each other. Well, what do we sequence now? And someone said, well, let's sequence the microbiome. There's lots there. And that's really when we've this thing all kicked off. And they basically, we can now, especially bacteria, that's why they're easy to sequence. There's some common handles you can put on a DNA primer, and then you can sequence from that and then find the differences. And then based on that sequence, you can genetically identify these microbes, even though we can't grow them. And that's when we realized that every person has a different set of microbes. There is no one conserved microbe in all people. And they're unique to you depending on where and how you live, type thing. And so that started to come along. And then also some experiments started to come along. For example, obesity. A fellow named Jeff Gordon in St. Louis, he did some experiments where he took uh, feces from basically fat mice and put them in thin mice, and they lost weight. And he put thin mice feces into heavy mice, and they lost weight. So basically, you could transfer weight gain or loss based on these microbes. And many other experiments like that, people started to realize, oh, these things might be evolved. And then they started to look, because we had the tools to look. And many of these diseases that, like not just obesity, type 2 diabetes, dementia, multiple sclerosis, autism, all these people had different microbes than people that didn't have that disease. And that's what really kickstarted the whole quest. But just because you have different microbes with disease versus not doesn't prove that it's causing the disease. And so that's where the last 15 years have been spent really trying to figure out, is it true that these actually cause it, or just because you have inflammatory bowel disease, your microbes are different? And so that is now driving the science as we dive into the mechanisms. How on earth do microbes actually affect, say, for example, the brain? Are they making neurotransmitters? Are they affecting the immune system, affects the brain? We know they're different in, say, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's people, but we don't know how that's working. So that's why it's taken us a while to get there.
All right. You have to give us more then. What's the latest on the effect on the diseases you mentioned, for example?
Well, let's start with why you're going to die. So, in Canada and the US, there's a list of the top 10 reasons why you're going to die. And when you look at this list, these are all the common ones. These are heart attacks and strokes and dementia and only one on that list is actually infectious, and that's pneumonia. Well, COVID might be on the list too right now. I'm not sure. And pneumonia is caused by usually you get a viral infection, and then bacteria crawl in, and then that basically. But all the others don't technically have a microbe component. When you look at that list, we can now say with quite confidence that 9 of those 10 reasons actually have some microbial involvement to them. And the only one that really doesn't are accidents, kind of thing. So, so then you dive into each of these, and let's just say cardiovascular disease. So that's heart attacks and strokes. So everyone says that's high cholesterol, right? Everyone knows this. Well, it turns out there is a molecule that is something called trimethylamine, which is actually a better marker than cholesterol for cardiovascular disease. And it turns out that this molecule is, you eat red meat or whatever, this molecule is broken, meat's broken down by the microbes. They make this molecule, and it gets oxidized in the liver, and then causes basically atherosclerosis. And you can then use the microbial prediction to say whether or not that's a better predictor of your heart attack risk, for example, than, for example, cholesterol levels. So that's just one example. We can pick through each of these diseases and show what we know now. And frankly, as Jessica said, it really is startling that it is completely rewriting the book on medicine about how these diseases actually work and what the microbes do to actually interface with these diseases and either cause them or prevent them. The other
So
half of the coin,
how
I think I'll turn it over to Jessica now for the other half of the coin and how beneficial these microbes can be and also influences on aging.
Yeah, the major one I think about that kind of opened my eyes in writing this decision was about inflammation. So, inflammation is a natural process. It helps your body heal from injury or infection. In those acute moments, it is helpful and it's a body's in important defense mechanism. But when we have this chronic low grade, inflammation that exists over months and years at a time, that becomes an excessive amount. It is just one of the biggest hallmarks of aging. And it is linked to the development of so many age-related diseases from your brain to your heart to all across the body. And so something that we found in writing this book was really those microbial links that we can see seepages and we can see different microbial compositions and just help to explain some of why, if the one thing you really want to protect your body, it is reducing this long-term chronic inflammation. And so some of those microbial pathways give us, and we'll get to, I think, at some point, those, what can you do to support your microbes? There's a lot you can do, which therefore then gives us additional tools and reasons and ideas about how to protect our bodies to age well through the life course.
I guess the next question then is, what does a healthy microbiome look like?
I think Jessica and both are chuckling because that's a really hard question. If you'd ask, what does a bad microbiome look like? Easy. We could see those, we know those. But ironically, healthy people have very different microbes. And generally speaking, there's a couple of concepts that indicate a healthy microbiome. The first is diversity. We all know that ecosystems need a diverse set of individuals in it. The Amazon, for example. And if you have a very diverse microbiome, that's good. Secondly, there's a couple other markers that one can look for the ability of these microbes to make things. As Jessica said, they play a big role in inflammation. And it turns out there's a group of microbes that basically eat fiber. So, everyone says eat fiber. Well, why do you eat fiber? Well, it turns out these microbes break down that fiber into something called short chain fatty acids, such as butyrate and acetate. And this turns out butyrate is actually a really beneficial molecule. What it does is it dampens the inflammation, it lowers the inflammation. So that lowers the chronic low-grade inflammation that Jessica was talking about involved in inflammaging. And so it's basically an anti-inflammatory in that sense. So those are good to look for. Bad ones that we see all the time are certain microbes associated with inflammation. For example, we all know about E. coli. It turns out it has molecules on the surface called lipopolysaccharide or LPS. This is a very inflammatory molecule. And so there's markers of bacteria and diseases that basically trigger this inflammation. And as you get older, your intestine gets more permeable. These inflammatory microbes trigger, and you don't eat fiber, for example, then you have a much more inflammatory microbiome, and that we know is not good and associated with disease. So if you send your feces away to get it tested, you get a long list of microbes. Is it good? Is it bad? That's kind of hard to tell, but you do look for these various markers as indications of what a healthy microbiome is.
Okay.
And then we'll
You
just
mentioned,
add that when we look at the centenarians and super centenarians, so when we look at those folks, those super successful agers, people who live to be 100, 110, we see exactly what my dad just described. We see that diversity of a kind of abundant microflora. And so that's another key that we can look at to think what is amongst these, aging populations.
staying on that for a bit, is it correct that the ones living to 100, 110, 120, is it correct that they attract the same diseases, but only later in life?
Sometimes, but not necessarily. I mean, we know, for example, we have age-related cognitive decline. So that is a normal part of the aging process. Our brains literally become more rigid. Our thinking processes are firing less rapidly. But then you, at some point, reach the line where you slip into cognitive impairment. And so Alzheimer's is one of a family of diseases. So yes, many very old people will experience some form of cognitive decline that could lead to impairment. It could be marked by one of these dementias like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's Lewy body, there's others, but it's not necessarily that they will have these diseases. So many of our super successful agers, they often have quite their physical and cognitive abilities. They've been able to maintain them over the years through a combination of sometimes genetics, but often more so just your lifestyle, your diet, your practices, what life you've lived. So they don't always have the same, for example, I don't want to overgeneralize because there's many different types of bodies and lives, but oftentimes this group does not have frailty, for example, that is onset in their 60s. They might experience frailty in their 90s or at 100, but it's not happening. I've had people in studies that I'm running, and I call them and they tell me they won't live to see 65. And that's because of hard lives lived, experiencing many, many multiple chronic diseases. And so these folks who are able to live to their hundreds often don't experience it quite as early, of course, but they do experience the same diseases, just it is happening later, but not all of the same ones. So
Okay.
it's complicated, like everything, right? It's
Yeah.
not one size fits all. There's no magic bullet to age well, but there are typically strategies that we can all try to pursue that help us age well.
Yeah. Because you mentioned a diverse microbiome is important. Does that mean that a diverse diet is necessary?
Yeah, I mean, there's things in diet, not necessarily diverse, but kinds of diet. For example, we know red meat is actually not very good for the microbiome. It causes more inflammatory microbes, for example. So as we went through this book, what became very apparent is one should really follow a healthy diet. That's probably the number one thing that people can do to enhance their microbiome health and also their own health. So things like the Mediterranean diet, which I'm sure everyone knows about, less red meat, a lot more fruits, nuts, vegetables, legumes. These all have lots of fiber. Really, it's a fiber enhancing diet. There's also a diet called the MIND diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and something called the DASH diet that was designed for cardiovascular disease. And wonderful finding in big studies was that if you follow the MIND diet, you drop your rates of Alzheimer's by about 50%. Now, no other thing can have that influence at all. This is a stunning result of decreasing the incidence of Alzheimer's just by changing your diet or keeping on that diet. And that diet, of course, has lots of fiber and things. And we know that that then triggers basically beneficial microbes and the anti-inflammatory type microbes. So yeah, I think, one lesson we really learned in writing the book is the number one thing you should do is follow a healthy diet, Mediterranean style diet.
Because there's so much talk these days, and there are so many podcasts and news articles about different diets, high carb, low fat, low carb, high fat, etc. Only meat, carnivore. What should I say? How profound are the findings, and how trustworthy can we be that a Mediterranean diet is the way to go?
There is a lot of hype, and I think one of the goals of this book was to just provide information and let people make decisions based on the science, because it can be overwhelming, it can be confusing, it can be expensive. Do I buy this? Do I do that? What do I do? You're right. There's a lot out there, and it can be staggering sometimes as to what we see. I would say the Mediterranean diet is highly validated. It has been studied in thousands and thousands of people across the world for many, many years. So it is a highly, according to our standards of scientific rigor, it has been shown time and time again in well-validated gold standard randomized controlled trials. So we feel, and it's also, I think what sometimes sometimes you need to, well, this is going to sound funny for this, but you have to gut check something to think through, the Mediterranean diet or the MIND diet. They're not super fads that would necessarily deviate. These are diets that many people have been eating for generations, if not longer. Things like whole grains, leafy vegetables, berries, fish, beans, and nuts, olive oil. I think if something is setting off your internal radar of that seems a little far-fetched. This feels very kind of intuitive eating, and it has been done and practiced across the world quite successfully so we sort of have both anecdotal evidence and we have really valid and rigorous scientific evidence that support the Mind diet, Mediterranean diet, DASH diet. These are all highly studied, and also, again, don't stretch you in any direction too crazy, it feels like. They're fairly intuitive, straightforward, and hopefully more accessible diets that we can all try to pursue in different ways.
What about the explosion of processed foods? How does that affect
Not
our,
good.
our gut?
Uh, yeah, I mean, we certainly added that. One of the things I did is I took the ingredients of a standard popular children's cereal and looked through it kind of thing. And it read like a who's who of a chemist's inventory type thing, all these synthetic things. Yeah, it's not good. Study after study has been showing now that ultra-processed foods, things. And when you think about it, the question is, well, why? Well, there's kind of two components. One is there's many chemicals that are not usually found in natural foods that are being added, preservatives and things that we wouldn't have seen as we evolved. And that's a big thing. But the other thing is they're processed, so they're broken down. So even things like white sugar and white flour are actually technically processed because you break down the grains and things, or you purify the sugars, and so that basically takes the microbes' job away. So when you eat white flour and white sugar, all the energy is absorbed very rapidly high up in the intestine, and it doesn't even make it down to most of the microbes. They're living way down in the lower intestine. So in essence, you're actually starving the microbes that are waiting there for the fiber and things. When you eat fiber, for example, your body doesn't actually break down that fiber. We let the microbes do it. We don't even have the enzymes that do this. So in essence, when you're eating fiber, you're eating the fiber to feed the microbes so that they can break it down to then feed you type thing. So ultra-processed foods bypass all these mechanisms. And yes, the data is coming out quite strongly actually that ultra-processed foods are not good for the microbiome, which in turn is probably not good for you.
I'm guessing the same holds true for alcohol.
Well, it actually, there was this was, I think, one of the boxes in the book, one of the fun pullouts about red wine, if I remember right. That there was some that might, again, in moderation, actually, the wine in moderation is permitted in the both Mediterranean and Mind diets, if I'm remembering correctly. And there were some in the kind of grapes that were being used in these. There might have been some hints of evidence that it's not terrible in moderation, that there were actually some that it could be broken down and for your microbes. But the large excessive consumptions of alcohol are, yes, generally not supporting your microbiome, and they push you more towards what we call a dysbiotic microbiome. So that tends to be kind of this imbalance and more towards these inflammatory and other kind of just, again, it's not great in large quantities, but potentially small quantities might be okay for your microbes.
Okay, a lot of people will be pleased. What about fasting? Intermittent fasting or longer fasting? What kind of impact does that have?
Yeah, we looked closely to that actually in the book, and as we got into the research, I mean, initially the studies I were finding, they did interesting studies in Ramadan where people, do intermediate fasting, for example, and they found they actually shifted for beneficial microbes. And I thought, oh, cool, intermediate fasting actually does have some data to say it's good. But then I found these other studies where they looked long term in intermittent fasting, and it was actually quite bad and not good. And so I had to rewrite this thing. Okay, maybe it's good in the short term, but long term, all the studies so far that have done have shown that it's actually not beneficial. I think the jury's still out. I think if you think how we evolved as a species, we would go through intermittent fasting. You would kill a big animal and have food for a while, and then you wouldn't have food for a while. And I think intermittent fasting was a normal process of humans. And I think that's also related to, for example, obesity in our society, that we have microbes that when we fast, you select for microbes that are really good at using energy. And then you walk into our society where energy is unlimited and you can eat as much as you want, and boom, you just pile on the weight. And we see these in societies that have just recently switched over to Western diets, where they suddenly just explode in weight as they become if you want to call them modern societies, and calories are cheap and plentiful, and you select for these microbes. And there's actually a reason why it's so hard to lose weight too, because you basically fast, you go on a diet, you select for these microbes that are really good at piling on weight, and you go off your diet, bam, you gain weight again. And there's some studies in mice that have translated in people that if you go on a diet, you really should wait at least 5 years before you go on another diet because all those microbes you're selected for that are really good at using energy, they're still there. And it takes about 5 years for them to go away. So maybe one moral of the story is if you are going on a diet, you got to stick on it. But that's kind of how we evolved. So the studies, the small studies we've seen so far is that short-term intermittent fasting is probably good. Long-term, the studies was saying it wasn't good.
And that takes me on to antibiotics.
Antibiotics are incredibly important and life-saving in our society. They save millions of lives. But as a society, we do now tend to overuse them. And so that is something that essentially they are carpet bombing your system. They're sort of indiscriminately killing off both good and bad microbes. And sometimes what can come back faster are those often ones that we link to more the kind of bad ones. And so we try in the book to talk about scenarios where you might use antibiotics. Of course, there are times when they're absolutely warranted, but there's also, again, times when they're not. And so we try to encourage folks to have conversations with healthcare providers like, okay, you've got an ear infection. It just started. Do you need it? Do you wait a couple days? What are the other factors about your life that might shift you to take it or not? And just being thoughtful. There's even, we've also, I mean, we can talk about antimicrobial products as well. They're sort of in that same family of they're just everywhere. We might not even notice. We've got cutting boards being applied. We've got, hand sanitizers dotting the walls. It's sort of this war on microbes. And again, in hospitals, yes, we need hand sanitizer. Well, oftentimes washing your hands with soap and water works just as well, or if not better, because again, you're letting those healthful microbes stay there while washing off the ones that need to go. So we try to, there's always nuance in science, and so it can be tough. Sometimes you just want a clear-cut answer, but we're trying to give the information so that you can think about when to take them and when not. There are times when we do, but there's also things you can do. You might think about those probiotic forward foods like having your yogurt or kefir or sauerkraut, or trying to again just amplify your fiber diets to kind of help feed and re-sustain your microbial composition in your gut. So there's things you can do. There's times you have to take it, but there's also times you don't. And so those are some of the scenarios we walk readers through in the book, is when and when not to take antibiotics.
So probiotics and prebiotics, they work.
Um, Not really. I mean, okay, so probiotics are basically live microbes that you can take. They don't really hurt you, but scientifically proving they have a medical benefit has been very difficult. They're not regulated as standard drugs, so that basically decreases the stringency of the claims you can make on these things. There are some probiotics that work for some things, and I always urge people just Google the words probiotic chart, and then these things will come up. There's one for the US, one for Canada, and it's a list of all the probiotics that are in these countries, what bacteria they are, and what is the scientific evidence that they actually work for various particular things. And the analogy I always use is the new pair of runners. You walk into a sporting goods store, and there's track shoes and jogging shoes and hiking shoes and tennis shoes. You don't just grab the cheapest one. It's okay, that'll work. And the same with probiotics. There are some probiotics that do work after you've had antibiotics for seems to help the diarrhea associated with that. There is a yeast that seems to work against C. difficile infections. So there's some scientific evidence to work towards that. But most of them don't really do any good. They don't really do any harm. Then there's these things called prebiotics, which are basically foods that you take to increase beneficial microbes. So kind of like fibers, as Jessica was alluding to. And the data there is very weak to show that because you're not just selecting for one microbe, you're selecting for a whole family, and you're much better off just eating fiber than taking, one of these things. And then there's the concept, why don't we put them together? Let's put the prebiotic, the food, in with the bacteria you want, and then that's what we call a symbiotic. And right now there's very little, there's actually no data to show that that actually works. And part of the reason probiotics don't work is many of them are not microbes that are meant to be where they are. For example, lactobacillus is normally found in a woman's vagina, so that's oxygen and acidic pH. In the gut, there's no oxygen, and it's a very basic pH. And so you then have to take billions and billions of these microbes every day because they basically die. So you're not really setting up a colony of microbes by taking these probiotics. You're just really, it's kind of a nutrient type thing of taking all these microbes. So now I know I've been hard on probiotics, but I also think that there's a really promising future in the next generation probiotics or probiotics 2.0, where you take a mixture of say 10 microbes that are from the gut and then have defined biochemical properties that you then put them into the gut repeatedly. They set up a colony and then basically you change the ecosystem. And you can then actually have a defined medical benefit that you go through the FDA or some other approval, regulatory approval place, and it's then a drug. And these are now in phase 3. There's several of them around that are coming now, or mixtures of live microbes that you take as a drug to prevent, say, recurrent Clostridium difficile infections, for example. And they work. And they're going through clinical trials right now, and the data is really beautiful. So there will be really good probiotics for certain medical conditions. Taking it for just general health, that's a very difficult one to quantitate. And, does it make you feel better and sleep better? That's really hard to prove. And there's really no good data there.
Okay. You spoke about the war on germs. I grew up in the sandbox and playing in the dirt and probably often not washing my hands before dinner, etc. How is this impacting us, and what about allergies, etc.? Just curious about that.
Yeah, the allergy links are often seen more in earlier life. So that's the Let Them Eat Dirt first book that my dad wrote. And they go in a lot about how it's linked to for kind of all of these, and it's an inflammatory cascade. I've got little children at home, so it's something that comes into my mind all the time. So yes, they're out there all the time. I've 3 boys in the dirt literally every day. And it's helped me stress less. Like, well, at least they're getting great microbe exposures. Other things like even having a dog in your household could be linked to reduce risk for asthma and other inflammatory conditions. And so there's again, this is more my dad's area of expertise. It often happens, what we're seeing so far to my knowledge earlier in life. But it is a huge consideration as well to have in later life. We so often are over sterilized. We live in air conditioned boxes if we have the resources to afford them. And especially for where we place our older adults, certainly in American societies, seeing, the nursing care and institutionalized housing is so often for complicated reasons, needs to be careful about what those exposures are. But I think we tend into this area of, again, the hand sanitizers dotting the walls, sometimes limited outdoor access, especially for folks who are more bedbound. It's harder to get literally outside. So we think through in the book and in our lives little ways to bring the outside in, or to bring those, which then bring in the microbe exposure. So can you open the doors or open the windows to let in fresh air? Can you have just even potted plants on your windowsill or on a bookshelf? Are there ways to, even if you can't get outside and get your toes in the dirt, literally, maybe you can do that in an inside setting, even if you are with limited capacities and mobility. And I think that is from in my life, it was an extra capacity when we were visiting my grandfather. We got him outside. One, he wanted to be out there, but two, it was a thought in my mind. Let's get you outside, not just to enjoy the fresh air, but help you enjoy these microbe exposures. So there are things we can do for older adults, even those who have limited capacities, to help enhance their and that's more the natural environment perspective. Social environments also swap microbes. Every time you shake hands, hug, touch a doorknob, you're swapping microbes. There's interesting studies about how many times if someone touches something contaminated, how many handshakes does it go through, for example? How long does it stay there? And so those are sometimes more negative light studies and perspectives, but they also playing cards, communal settings, dining together, playing activities and just talking, those are helping us swap our microbes, often towards potentially in beneficial and healthful ways. So being socially engaged, physically active, they all have microbial links, and they all can help us boost our health and well-being into later life.
What's the reason, or what are the reasons for so many food allergies and so many people having trouble with their stomachs or their guts, different diseases? I'm guessing has increased the last decades.
Yes. Yeah, the last couple of decades, actually. Yeah. So a lot of it goes back to very early in life. As Jessica said, I wrote a book called Let Them Eat Dirt. It's how to raise your kids with their microbes. And early life has a profound effect on setting up your body, the microbes in it that then affect the immune system. There's also, if you don't want to read a book, you can just YouTube Let Them Eat Dirt. We have a 1 hour documentary that's all about raising your kids with microbes that I would encourage every person to have a watch, because it really will change how you think about your kid. So what happens before you're born, the fetus is basically sterile, but as you come out, you encounter your mother's microbes. Birth is a messy business, but I argue that's the best birthday present your mother will ever give you. It's a big bolus of microbes, vaginal and fecal, and that's actually really important for the kids to get these things. Kids born by cesarean section, for example, they have about a 25% higher rate of both asthma and obesity. And we think this is related to not getting the right microbes to get things going early in life and get the immune system going. It also affects how the brain develops early in life, and it also affects how the immune system and the gut and many other things. So there's really two phases in life we think the microbes play the biggest effect. One is early in life and one is late in life. So we call them the bookends of life. And they have profound effects on the physiological effects. And so when you think about how we evolved, I mean, as a species, I mean, we were coated in microbes. We're living with animals, there's feces everywhere, very dirty microbial world. And now, as Jessica says, we're living in these sterile boxes that are synthetic, really, and we don't get these microbes. And there's real concern that we're losing the microbes that we evolved with, the missing microbes kind of thing. And there's even scientists that are now biobanking microbes from many tribes and places where there haven't been a lot of industrialization, because we're worried that every generation our microbes get more and more similar and get less and less like the way we evolved over the last million years with the microbes. And that we're going to lose these things that we suddenly realize, oh no, that was a key one and we don't have it anymore type thing. So to put it all in perspective, there's kind of these two conflicting ideas. One is hygiene. Hygiene has played a major role last 125 years in cleaning up our world, and we don't die of infectious disease anymore. That's wonderful. I mean, you don't have to have 10 kids going, one can make it to adulthood now. You know that you're not going to die of an infectious disease more, at least normally. But conflicting that is the fear of all microbes, not just those that cause disease. We call this the hygiene hypothesis. We're just living too cleanly, and by living too cleanly, we don't get these microbes, and so our normal processes don't get developed, and we don't experience these microbes. So, as Jessica's been saying, you need to balance these two. That don't be scared of dirt, but if there's during COVID, I think we went really the other way, and that's just because we had to. But so there's these two conflicting views, and really the answer is in the middle. You balance them. You try and avoid obvious situations where there's a serious infectious threat, but if not, embrace the world, because that's the world we live in.
Do we shower too often?
I
Ooh.
don't think a shower is the we're thinking more when you are using hand sanitizer multiple times a day, or when you're taking antibiotics on viruses, it's not going to work, for example. And so I don't think showering is not going to be the that's not the hygiene that we're quite as stressed about. I'm worried about all of the antimicrobial products that are in our clothing and on our cutting boards and coating our painted walls. That is more the kind of and just being stuck inside without access to the outdoors or to fresh air, to diverse foods. I mean, those ultra processed foods are shifting us towards these more limited microbial kind of exposures. And so it's more so a broader, deeper consideration, not so much, washing your hands with soap and water. We've done that for a long time. It's going to be fine. Or having that shower is not going to be shifting everything about your microbes.
Yeah. So Jessica, can you speak a bit more about the microbes and aging?
Yeah, I mean they're linked to pretty much everything. I mean that's something that was cool to explore in this book is so often we just focus on the gut. And the gut is the mecca of microbes. And it is well studied and there's a lot of exciting aspects. But we were able to think through and use scientific advantage to think about the brain, about the lungs, about our our genital areas, about our skin, about wrinkles. It just about how we live and where we live, about travel and snowbirds and it just was it's I think what is it just showed us the underlying just all of the linkages that exist. And then it led us to some kind of pretty it helped explain some intuitive strategies to help us age well. And so some of the big takeaways from the book, they're not mind-blowing and different, but I found it affirming that because embracing your microbes is embracing kind of just a holistic sense of lifestyle and health and wellness. So exercise, having a nutritious and balanced diet, trying to sleep more, trying to be less stressed, being social and engaging with others, all of these are supporting your microbes and therefore supporting healthy aging. Those are not new or different, or there's no fad that needs to be supported, for example. It is just affirming that a lot of the strategies we already know. They're what's going to help us age well through our microbes. So, exercise, for example, we can now get to some of the explanations about how it's increasing the diversity and abundance of your microbes, or how it's helping with short change fatty acid production or improving your gut barrier integrity. We're getting the hows and the whys now that help us get from exercise to healthy aging. It's giving us explanations in these pathways, these mechanisms, the hows and the whys. And for me, that's just really motivating because it's letting me know again, I'm a scientist. I want to know why is it good for me, and this is helping us give so many explanations about why things like sleep and stress and diet are moderated through our microbes to help us be healthy as we age.
Yeah. I have to also ask about microplastics. I heard just recently that there's even microplastics in glass bottles.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and they're definitely becoming part of us. And the question is, what does this do? I think it's still early days. I mean, microbes, they can break down pretty much anything. We know they can use microbes to chew up oil spills, for example. So microplastics are just another molecule, and I'm sure they're microbes that have figured out, hey, this is a good source to chew on. Whether this is good or bad, I think remains determined. I think obviously microplastics are not part of our normal evolution, and our bodies will have to figure out how to deal with this and whether they're bad or not, and whether this selects for microbes. I think it's too early to say, but I have complete confidence there will be microbes that will figure out how to use these microplastics and they'll figure out how to degrade them. And maybe in the future, there'll be a microbe you can take to actually help clean out your body of the microplastics. That's future. We don't know that, but I mean, it could be coming because they can take any hydrocarbon you throw at these microbes, they'll figure out a way to chew on it. They just see it as a food source and away they go. So we'll see. But for a bunch of reasons, I think one should avoid microplastics if you can. They're not part of the natural world.
Yeah. What about um forgetting now, but what about hmm, lost my train of thought. But never mind. The brain, the gut brain link. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, this is, as Jessica's talking about with Alzheimer's stuff, this is a really exciting area. People want to come to my lab, they only work on one thing, and that's the gut-brain axis. This is like so exciting. It's also so lacking in rigorous scientific mechanisms so far. One area that my lab has studied quite extensively is Parkinson's. So we talked a lot about Alzheimer's as being the leading cause of brain disease. The second leading cause is Parkinson's, and that's a disease where you get tremors and things. You're sort of stooped over, and about 1% of the population has that. Um, and it's really interesting story about how microbes came involved in that because Parkinson's, everyone knows that's a brain disease, and what it all started is that in a couple of Scandinavian countries, they were cutting the nerve that hooks the gut to the brain. This is called the vagus nerve. And those that got the vagus nerve cut, they had lower levels of Parkinson's. And no one could understand, like, that doesn't make any sense, sort of thing. And everyone didn't believe the study. It was repeated and a large number of people, and it was true. Um, then the other piece of the puzzle fell into place is that molecules evolved in Parkinson's things, something called alpha-synuclein. It's also expressed in the gut. Now, and then the other piece of the puzzle is the leading cause of Parkinson's, or the indication of Parkinson's, is constipation 20 to 30 years before you see Parkinson's. And no one knew why. Why is this? And then the second big indicator was eating red meat. That's very predictor. So these are both gut related. So fast forward now is that we think Parkinson's actually starts in the gut. What happens is you have decreased motility, you're constipated, and you select for bad microbes by eating red meat and things. And these things misfold this molecule called alpha-synuclein in the gut, and then it moves its way up in the vagus nerve. It gets up into the brain, and the part of the brain that makes um, synuclein and things. And that's what actually affects how the tremors go, and it kills the cells causing that makes molecules causing these tremors, and then you see Parkinson's as a brain disease. So we did a study a few years ago that showed that if you followed again the MIND diet, which we've been talking about for Alzheimer's, if you followed the MIND diet, you delayed the onset of Parkinson's by over 17 years in women and a decade in men. Now, given that Parkinson's doesn't happen until usually about 65 and over, that's incredible. That means that something else is going to kill you first. And this is again going back to just following a diet that we know by the microbes. So we can tell with confidence whether people have Parkinson's or not just by looking at the microbes in their feces. And again, they're lacking the short chain fatty acid producers. They have the inflammatory microbes and things, and they're all driving this. So that's one example of the gut brain. There's many others examples. If you take anxiety and depression, for example, if you take an anxious, depressed, or an mouse and fecal transfer into normal mouse, you transfer anxiety and depression just by doing a fecal transfer into this. And there's studies showing in people that, courses of antibiotics, more courses of antibiotics you take, which disrupt your microbes, the more higher there are the levels of the depression and anxiety type things. So it's a fascinating area. There's a whole concept. Could we use microbes that affect, anxiety, depression, all these other diseases, autism, for example? There's neat studies there. But frustratingly, the mechanism stuff, we're just starting to get into these and just starting to sort them out. But I think it's going to be a really neat, next decade is going to be profound in how the microbes influence the brain. And based on that, can we do something about it? Can you take an antidepressant microbe or microbes, probably a mixture of microbes, to actually push it away from depression, for example? So exciting area, not so much known, I guess, is where we stand now.
Yeah, yeah, that was the question I forgot. What about supplements? Are there supplements now that people, what should take?
For brain health, again, I
And
think the
gut
best.
health.
Well, I'll talk. Well, brain health first. Just follow the mind diet. I think that's probably your best bet, or Mediterranean diet. Um, Supplements for gut health. I personally would just revert back to all the data on all the diets and things and just follow the diet. I mean, um, you could take fiber supplements, but why not just take fiber in your food, kind of thing? You're achieving the same effect. But if you don't like food and you want to take supplements, then I suppose you're achieving the same effect. So there's not a lot of good data. Jess, you want to add anything on that?
No, I mean, I think there's limited risk of harm from some of these, probiotic, prebiotic supplements you can take. I think the difference is that here in the United States, I mean, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, does not, they don't regulate supplements. They're considered, they're not part of the rigorous regimes that we require for our, medicines and classic kind of medical approaches. And so they just don't have the same level of kind of checking. And so sometimes you can have a lot of hype. And at the moment, the science on supplements is not there yet. Like Brett mentioned earlier, there's exciting futures of where we might go. But at the moment, if you look at the science, what is there, it's really hard. We're taking, billions of microbes that probably won't survive. they may not even be there. Sometimes they've done testing. Okay, this yogurt says it has this level, or this supplement says it has this. Are they there? Are they alive? Do they and so there's no regulatory body that is upholding these really, really rigorous standards that we require for classic pharmaceuticals and other drugs. So we're just if it makes you feel good, if it's benefiting, if you feel like it's benefiting you and it's not if that's a part of your lifestyle that you want to have, there's not evidence saying that, probiotics are harmful to you, but you might not be getting the benefit that scientifically shown yet that you might think you are. So we're not in an era of, microbial supplements that are there. Again, there's a few small instances that they're helpful, but I would recommend looking at the charts, those probiotic charts. It just help you see what is the science, what is the evidence, and then you might be able to make a decision that suits you.
But even
Yeah.
in other supplements, for example, let's take vitamins. I mean, that's been around for years. They're still arguing, are vitamins even necessary if you eat a healthy, balanced diet? And the answer seems to be no, you don't need to take vitamins if you're just living, a good balanced diet. So yeah, there's a lot of arguments and not a lot of clear data either way.
So if we sum up, what would be like people love checklists. So what would be a checklist of 3 to 5 items that are really important to make sure that you increase the chance of having a good microbiome?
They're pretty
Well,
big boxes. Do you want to start that or you want me to?
Well, well, yeah. So this is maybe I'll just take it for a second, then you can embellish it, Jessica. So one of the things we did is we looked through. There's a book by Dan Buettner called The Blue Zones, and these are 5 places in the world people live for a long, long time. And I went through this book with a microbiologist lens on. So it's Okinawa, Japan. It's 2 places in the Mediterranean. It's Costa Rica and Loma Linda, California. And why are these people living so long? And, Dan Buettner would argue, well, it's the places they live in, it's the things they do. And when you look through this thing, there's sort of 5 reasons that we really strongly think that you can influence. And Jessica already listed them once. The first is diet. Okay, Okinawa, Japan, it's fish and rice and things. Mediterranean, duh, it's the Mediterranean diet. Costa Rica, rice and beans, sort of thing. And they all stay away from red meat. But the question is, why is Loma Linda, California there? Well, they're Seventh-day Adventists, and their religion says you're vegetarian, so they don't eat a lot of red meat. Okay, so the first one is diet. Have a healthy diet like the Mediterranean diet. The second one, as Jessica already alluded to, is exercise. Be active. You don't have to be a marathon runner, but you should be out there walking. Just get outside, and again, these places are environments conducive to it. Loma Linda, California, you can play tennis every day, for example. So you have exercise. Um, the third one is a sense of community. And in our societies, we actually tend not to have multi-generational homes and things. Whereas in like Costa Rica, you've got the 80-year-old daughter looking after the 100-year-old dad with the great grandkids and the dogs roaring through the house and all these young microbes everywhere in their feces and things. So, or friends, good friend network. Loma Linda, California, you have the religious network that really helps their social type things. The fourth one is stress, decrease stress. Costa Rica sort of hang loose kind of thing. Just decrease stress, and that's probably the one we have the hardest is decreasing stress in our lives. We live stressful lives, and stress is really bad for increasing inflammatory microbes and things like that. And the one we added in this latest version of the book is sleep. And there's lots of really exciting data coming out on microbes influencing sleep and again, it boiled down to those that followed the Mediterranean diet had much better sleeps than those that had poor diets, for example. And all the details are still coming. So those 5 reasons. So diet, exercise, decrease stress, have a community, and then get a good night's sleep are probably the 5 checklists. And it's thought that by doing this, you can add about a decade of healthy living to a normal person's life on average. Now, it's odds. You may get cancer or whatever early, but generally it's that. So those are kind of the themes that it just every time we went through any kind of disease, we kept encountering these same things that you can actually proactively do. Jess, you want to add something as a gerontologist, which is your area, now that I've taken it?
No, I think I mean it's there's a microbial lens to just aging well. But again, it's that affirmation that these are not new mind-blowing strategies, but they're important ones, and it gives us the reason as to why, and we can now find all these microbial links and reasons. But it just further affirms what supports us to be healthy and well, and not just live longer, but live better, to have that high quality of life, to be active physically, cognitively active into our later years. Because while we've increased life expectancy in our recent decades, and of course over the last 100+ years, we still haven't seen the years of kind of good, healthy, mobile life. It hasn't increased at the same rate. So in many, many places, people are living longer, but they're not living better yet. They're not having that enjoying, a later life that is active. And like Brett already said, I mean, it's not, you don't have to go run a marathon. You don't have to get expensive supplements. Just moving your body, working in the garden, being around people, all of these enacted through our microbes, through our daily lives, they really are just incredibly beneficial for us to be able to live well in our later years.
Sounds like a good place to stop then. Brett and Jessica, thank you for your time. It was interesting.
Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much.
Thanks.
Tusen takk for at du hørte på Bendiksen Airways. Dersom du har tips, kommentarer eller vil gi en vurdering av episoden, så gjør gjerne det. Det setter jeg stor pris på.